don't know if I did right. Yeah, look at me.
Dude, what did you just do to me?
Look at me. No.
Oh no, dude. No, dude.
I can't play like this.
Hey, once you die, I'll reset. Once you die, I'll reset.
A new PTR already? Well, the last one took a month before it went live, so yes, a new PTR just went up yesterday with a host of bug fixes onto it, as well as a few quality of life improvements. Finally, now are we getting party flex for role queue, which means when you have multiple members in a party, you're allowed to select multiple roles. Now, the way this is going to work is depending on who picks first in the party. If you're queuing for ranked, your other teammates are going to be limited on what's going to work within SR range. Obviously, that's still going to be a limiting factor, but in a pre-made group, you think you could work that out amongst yourselves in order to get you into a game. But if you are similar on multiple roles, you will be allowed to pick more than one per individual, just like you can when you're in solo queues, something that I asked for as soon as it came out. And what it should do is decrease queue times when queuing in a group. It also says in the patch note that if multiple players select the same role, obviously only 2 of them can play it. And what it'll do is that with your queue preferences set as that, it'll alternate where it puts you every other game. So if you have a party of 3 and you all pick support, it'll trade you in and out. So everybody gets a turn, basically, when you go from queue to queue. I'd say this is a pretty big buff for quick play, which already is the best place to play Overwatch by far, because in that, players are more likely to dabble in other roles, whereas in ranked, it's much more challenging to do so. People specialize in roles and even just heroes, for that matter, in ranked to begin with, whereas in quick play, LFG is still used, grouping up happens more often, and now you more easily can swap roles without it being a jarring stop to your gameplay, having to reestablish the queue again. You can just keep queuing for quick play over and over again. Man, quick play is great. I'm not bitter about how much better quick play is than ranked at all. Okay, on a lighter and goofier note, as I showed in the intro clip from Tim the Tatman's stream, which of course you should check out, it was also floating around on Reddit that on the live version of the game, there is a May exploit that has a brand new way to tilt your teammates, this time literally, and the glitch itself allows for that player to be able to take flight. It's pretty goofy and more so trolls your team than provide some crazy benefit. And this kind of thing gets fixed quite quickly, and I expect a hot fix any moment, really, if not at least by a day. But in the meantime, just keep in mind that this is a rather goofy and easily reproducible exploit. At this point of the video, I wanted to also give you guys my opinions on how the patch has been panning out, and just some general trends and themes of how Overwatch plays now. And of course, the Great Barrier nerf of 2019 has caused a serious shift in gameplay. It's always interesting the things you find out that you didn't expect to happen, and I'll get into talking about that here. So here's a few principles that I think are good food for thought. One example is that with the way barriers have been reworked, I've noticed that it's been much harder to defend, at least defend in a defensive way. Obviously, let me clarify. You used to be able to defend by just putting up anti-damage abilities and playing keep away. Whether we're talking about double barrier or some of the triple support GOATS principles that just had so much sustaining, controlling the objective and just ignoring the map basically and just establishing your cooldowns in an area dominated the game. With the barriers nerfed to such a severe degree, like a light switch, all of that is turned off. And this is what we expected, of course. We did say map control is going to matter much more, but the interesting byproduct of that is that it's going to cause defensive teams to have to play much differently. And I think the exchange of this advantages the offense. I've seen a lot of games go into multiple overtimes because defending teams just can't hold their ground like they're used to. So you used to be able to jump on the objective and force the enemy to come to you because you couldn't get outpoked. Okay, your sustain was just too high. You say, hey, come on, come brawl us, whether it's double barrier, or goats, same thing. Now that's dead, and instead you have very limited resources to put onto the objective. So as soon as the enemy has any damage angles on you, they instantly begin to win. You have maybe a second or two to sustain at a disadvantaged position, and then boom, you're done. You better get to cover or you're going to die. It's such a reality check for everybody, and it's forcing us to play the game entirely differently. So what ends up happening is defending teams either have to be more active in creating engagements onto the attacking side, or are simply just less effective at defending. Keep in mind as well, defending teams don't really want to go fight you necessarily if they don't have to, because anytime you take a fight, it's a risk and you might lose some people. In a lot of spots, defending teams can't afford to lose people. Otherwise, the attack is simply winning. So the defending side is kind of left with no good options to easily defend anyway, because the attacking side needs to fight because they're on the clock, right? The defending side would prefer to burn the clock and avoid fighting when possible, but that's just harder to do now. Okay, now to be clear, on any map where the defender's positional advantage based on the map is massive, then you have an advantage for sure, but it's ground dependent, not hero dependent. There are certain maps where it's totally fine for you to ignore the cart and hold high ground and shoot down. If that's the case, defense is easier on this patch, but in many spots where you will need to go contest the objective, go fight, likely get traded out, mobility characters on the defense start to look better than the traditional, quote, defensive playstyle characters. Because like Orisa, for example, sort of has defense. Not enough for the whole team anyway. For one or two teammates on a certain angle or off angle, she looks great, but as soon as you try to put the entire team behind it, it's usually left wanting if there is enough damage to poke you out. So because of that, the other route you can go is be more active on the defense, like I said, and just play characters that have that playstyle. One that comes to mind is Wrecking Ball, which you may intuitively think is bad at defending normally, right? Because he doesn't stand his ground and play defensively. But as I said, defensive play is just kind of whack now. It doesn't really exist. Both sides need to create an engagement and go. But Wrecking Ball, because he has so much personal health, he can contest objectives really well, get in, get out, and then risk dying, as well as have a fast run back from spawn to just get more touches onto the cart, even with dying more than the enemy. So that principle, which is kind of goats-like, where you're just sending health points at the objective, can still work, but it's done through mobility, in my opinion, instead of sustain. And just about every other playstyle has to be around map control, in my opinion. And I've been trying to explain this in the past few videos and guides, and it's something that I'll just have to keep teaching, but power positions on maps are way more important than the objective. For about a year or two now, due to crazy sustain, that hasn't been the case, but all of a sudden it is again. And with that, nobody's really sure what the top picks are. And the great improvement to Overwatch gameplay is that because of that, way more play styles are active at once. You can get way more things to work right now, and it might just be because it's a honeymoon phase and everybody's trying different things, but I'm not so sure that's the case. What I actually think is that the top level probably will devolve into a very small subset of heroes like it always does, but it will be a, quote, good ranked patch, as I've said a few times in Overwatch's life cycle, which, because that playstyle requires such specific team coordination and responsibilities, rather than it being kind of easy and winning through just value of the stats of those characters, it'll be hard for ranked players to replicate that kind of teamwork. And because of that, a lot of the game is opened up. And to that point, the playstyles between heroes in overall strength power is less noticeable, which is a good thing. That's what we want out of Overwatch, right? Where now, if you have a soldier on your team, because shielding and damage denial is so weak, the gap between him and maybe Hanzo, who might be the meta DPS, it's sort of like, well, it just depends which player hits his shots, right? It's not like you need Hanzo because he mathematically breaks the shield so perfectly that without it, you just lose. Whether it's Hanzo, McCree, Ashe, whatever range DPS, you're just playing a range DPS with different cooldowns, right? Like, they're all kind of similar right now, from at least what I can tell. We might decide something different later, but for the ranked environment anyway, I think the play styles are much more interchangeable, which is a good thing. But what you'll want to be sure to keep an eye on when playing in this new environment is that I think it's even more punishing to have a bad team comp, right? Because the math of how team fights work is so severe. If you say have Orisa as a tank, but you have Brawler DPS, and the enemy has established map control, Orisa can't make space for those DPS to get into position. She just walks out, shield gets shredded, boom, you're dead. That shield break war doesn't work. Instead, it's much more important that your heroes synergize in a more logical way, where they play similar roles. And in my experience so far, anytime you see that not be the case, you get severely punished. Seeing a lot of blowouts one way or the other, just because the team comp doesn't fit quite right. And the only hero right now that I think is far and away too good in their role is Baptiste. Because if you remember when Baptiste came out, I actually said Immortality Field's a bit overrated because barriers are an immortality field, right? In a way. If you have defense matrix and barriers all the time, you don't really need a gimmicky cooldown that does the same thing, just worse. Well, now it's better than those things. And there's an odd interaction with how it plays out as well, where say you have the Baptiste and the immortality field is placed out of line of sight. The enemy also doesn't have much defenses themselves. So the gaps in time where you use fields, then their shields break, they have such a disadvantage whenever you set up that engagement. It's a really big deal, so much so that you kind of need your own lamp in order to compete, or like perfect pathing, basically. And Baptiste got a fire rate increase, and his ult already was pretty incredible. All of these things make Baptiste like the best hero in the game right now, I think. He does everything, takes advantage of the low shields, is the only way to give your team a ton of sustain, making us all really question why they also gave him that fire rate when they knew they were going to be nerfing shields across the board. It doesn't really add up. But I will say, to sort of devil's advocate that point, because a lot of higher level players really feel this way about Baptiste, if they nerf him out of being a top meta pick, the other thing that can happen is that the game gets even more severe, like dive era with power creep DPS. Like things just will get deleted like we've never seen before. It won't just be because mobility and focus fire, it will be because everything has been buffed and buffed and buffed to just delete you, because it used to have to compete with insane barriers and tanking abilities stacking. Well, now that that's kind of gone, we're just left with some pretty incredible damage power. So basically what I'm saying is I still want tons of the DPS power creep during the GOATS era to go away, alongside with reining in Baptiste a little bit. Because I think those damage picks have kind of gone the other way now, where tanking is super difficult. I actually think it's the most difficult I can ever remember it being. I like this gameplay way more, don't get me wrong. I'd much rather play in Masters as a tank where it's really hard than play in top 500 during the GOATS or double shield era, which is exactly what happened. I'm really rusty and sucked at double barrier, so I did drop down to Masters for a bit. And it's been fun trying to learn how to make big impacts on a tank, and especially around teammates that don't really understand the patch, which is typical of Masters level anyway, no matter what the patch is, but it's even more magnified now. And tanking is just so far less forgiving that the moment you're out of position or make a bad decision, you get instantly punished. And I think scaling the damage of the game overall, whether it comes from the support or DPS category, to the amount of tanking we have now, I would like to see, because we currently have situations where characters like Hanzo and McCree used to be diveable by Winston, but most of the time now they're not. Winston's pretty playable just because he has mobility alone, but you basically have to play perfect in order to get that to work and play around your bubble more than playing around a dive, which is doable, but I think we're going to find out just isn't worth it up against most things that are going to realistically be picked in a high amount. All the strategies are attacking each other in a very punishing rock, paper, scissors way, which is making a lot of games in ranked be very lopsided in my opinion, which is kind of what I said earlier about team comps being so important. Well guys, it's gonna be everything for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on the new patch. We'll be updating you as the week goes on and we find out more things. It's the best time to be an Overwatch player because so much of this is still in flux and we get to learn and unlock how the game plays. And I'd say this isn't getting the fanfare that previous Overwatch patches have gotten, but I think this is the most impactful patch we've ever seen, just fundamentally changing the whole game, and it's been fun to dig into. So if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.